Hi, welcome back to Focal Point AAFR Talk. I'm Brian Fisher, your congenial, convivial, and amiable, as always, host. You are listening to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio, where we love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, strength, and, just like Bobby Jindal, with our minds. Now, our guest on our Decision Maker line is Scott Lively. Scott is the head of Abiding Truth Ministries. He is also a candidate for governor of the state of Massachusetts. We're honored to have him back on this program, a frequent guest on this program. Scott, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Hey, Brian, good to be back with you.
Well, great to have you with us. And, Scott, I want to just plunge right into what I brought you on here to talk about. We talked about this over the course of the last week. You sent a press release out middle of this week about a truly despicable thing that has happened, and it feeds into a larger theme, Scott, of something I've observed, that actual hate crimes against homosexuals, we're not saying that they don't occur. Don't misunderstand us, or me. I'm not saying that they don't occur, but they are so rare that they have to be invented. And, Scott, we've got an example. And then when these invented crimes occur, they are pinned on people in the pro-family movement, falsely in many cases. And in this case that we're going to talk about right here, not only were you blamed for this bogus hate crime, but the American Family Association, we were blamed by a homosexual activist group for this bogus hate crime. So tell us about this.
Well, Brian, just this week, a friend from northern Michigan forwarded me something that he had gotten in a Facebook alert of some kind. And it was a horrific picture of an African man being burned to death with a crowd of people standing around watching. It's really one of the most disturbing pictures I've ever seen in my life. And the caption on the picture was saying that this was a Ugandan homosexual man who had been beaten, stoned, and then burned alive for being gay, and that this was the responsibility of hate mongers like Scott Lively and the American Family Association, because we were, quote, more than anyone else responsible for promoting violence against gays and lesbians around the world. And this is really the worst of a long series of hate messages and hoaxes that I've seen.
And Scott, I'm looking at this Facebook post. You included it in your communication with me and in your press release. And the last line in the Facebook post is, please share this alarming picture so the world can know. Please share it. So they want this post blaming the American Family Association for the gruesome death of this African man. He's lying next to the railroad tracks. And when the picture was taken, he still got flames and smoke coming up from his body.
Oh,
and
they want absolutely awful.
It is. It's horrible. And they want the whole world to believe that you're at fault for this and that the American Family Association is at fault for this. And speaking of false hate crimes, I just came across another one yesterday, Scott. This is from San Francisco, about a woman who claimed to be the victim of an anti-gay crime in 2004. And she's just now admitting that the reason she made the accusation is she hadn't done her homework. She was looking for an excuse to get sent home from school, so she puts graffiti in her locker. The authorities come, they're upset, they're outraged, they send her home so she can collect her thoughts. They have some kind of a vigil then in the wake of this with 250 people standing with her. 2 boys were arrested at gunpoint as possible suspects for this hate speech in her locker, and it turns out the whole thing had been made up from the beginning. Now, Scott, tell us the truth.
This is very common. Very common.
Tell us the truth now about this picture. What did you find out? You dug into this. What did you find out about the origin of this picture and the facts behind this picture?
Well, I sent a copy of it to my contacts in Africa and asked if they knew anything about this, and I got a fairly quick response back that Stephen Langa's wife, Beatrice, he's my main ministry partner in Uganda, said she had seen that picture floating around on the internet a couple of years ago. And it turns out that this is a picture from the Kibera slum. It's about 1 million people in this gigantic slum outside of Nairobi, Kenya. And he was a thief, a mugger, who was killed by a vigilante mob because he was stealing money from these desperately poor people as they were coming home from work back to the slum. And that it's a horrific crime, but has absolutely nothing to do with homosexuality. It didn't take place in Uganda, and I got a copy of that from the young man who took the picture and posted it on his own blog. And so I got a copy of that went along with the press release that I released.
So here's this picture. They want to share with the whole world, blaming you, blaming us for the death of this poor individual. Turns out it didn't even happen in Uganda, number one. And the guy wasn't even a homosexual. He was a common thief, and it was an expression of vigilante justice by these people who were tired of getting ripped off. Now, when it comes to Uganda, Scott, this is not the first time that you have been falsely accused of things in Uganda. In fact, tell us about what happened there was a very well-known homosexual activist in Uganda by the name of David Kato. Tell us what happened to you in connection with his death.
Well, David Kato was murdered in early 2011. He was beaten to death with a hammer. And the world liberal press immediately jumped on the story that supports their sort of narrative that all disapproval of homosexuality leads ultimately to murder. And I was getting blamed for David Kato's death as well. And even after the actual killer, a young man named Enoch Sidney Nabuga, who was caught by the police, confessed, and it turns out he was a male prostitute who had been bailed out of jail by Kato to be his live-in lover, and when he failed to pay him, the young man beat him to death with a hammer. He's serving 30 years in a Ugandan prison, and the media has never corrected the story. They just, and the activists, in fact, the lawsuit that's against me, this Crimes of Humanity lawsuit, is being brought by the organization that David Kato headed, and in their lawsuit, they leave those facts out. They're essentially lying to a federal judge by omission, by leaving the facts out that he was actually killed by a male prostitute. So it's another example of gay-on-gay violence that's being falsely blamed on Christians.
You know, and I still read news accounts about Uganda and so forth, Scott. I still read accounts of how Kato's death is being blamed on pro-family activists in Uganda. Sometimes your name is mentioned, sometimes not. But they are still, even after the guy that committed the crime has admitted to it, he confessed it, he's now serving 30 years in prison for it. The case has been solved. It had nothing to do with pro-family activists. This was a dispute between two homosexuals over whether this guy was going to get paid for homosexual sex, took a hammer to the guy that was supposed to pay him and killed him. These are the facts. There's no question about this, and yet still, and I guess this illustrates the larger point that I'm making, Scott. You know, it is pro-family community. We do not hate homosexuals. We're not out to beat them up. We're not out to commit violence. We're not out to promote any kind of violence. We speak out forcibly against violence against homosexuals. If you want a religion that promotes violence against homosexuals, Islam is the religion. You know, there's this huge boycott right now. I'm sure you've seen that, Scott, over Beverly Hills Hotel.
Yeah, I've seen that,
Yeah, Beverly Hills, because the Sultan of Brunei owns the Beverly Hills Hotel, and they've just instituted Sharia law in Brunei. It requires the death penalty for homosexuality. Now the A-list celebrities in Hollywood, now they're up in arms. They're boycotting the Beverly Hills Hotel. It's turned into a virtual ghost town because they're finally realizing what Sharia law and Islam is really on about.
Yeah.
And Scott, talked about the Uganda law because you're still tagged as being blamed for what's called the Kill the Gays bill in Uganda. Tell us the straight scoop about that bill dealing with homosexuality in Uganda, your part in it, and your assessment of it.
Well, first of all, that name was given to it by Rachel Maddow, which ought to tell you all you need to know.
Yeah, there's a credible source.
Yes, well, it was a law that was overly harsh. It's still overly harsh. It no longer contains the death penalty. It was passed from bill into law last month sometime, I think, and it still has too harsh, overly harsh penalties. And I've never supported that. I do not support jail for people based on homosexuality. I was clear about that from the very beginning. But what's happened here, Brian, is I'm being targeted by the global homosexual community as the target. This is a Linsky style. Linsky said, pick the target, freeze the target, then destroy the target. They basically take one person and you make that person the symbol of opposition to whatever your leftist agenda is, and then you make that person famous or infamous, and then you destroy them as sort of a lesson to everyone. And I'm apparently been picked as that person, and they're after me now with this Crimes Against Humanity lawsuit, and all the leftist media has sort of banded together and are doing a series of different sort of high-profile stories, all repeating the same set of lies over and over again, building a broad case.
In fact, speaking of lies, Scott, you actually lobbied against any death penalty provision in the Uganda law, and you argued instead, you lobbied lawmakers there for prevention and therapy as the response to homosexual behavior rather than incarceration or death. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's correct. I saw the bill before it was released. They wrote it. I was there in March of 2009. There was a working group that drafted the thing at the end of April. They sent me a copy before they released it, a few days before they released it, asked for my comments, and I responded with suggested modifications that included two sections focused on rehabilitation and prevention, and that was exactly what I had advised them when I spoke to their parliament. So all this misrepresentation is just another example of dishonesty by the gays.
Scott Lively has sent a letter to TC Equality on his behalf and AFA's behalf demanding a retraction and an apology. I'm probably not holding my breath, and I'm guessing, Scott, neither are you.
No,
and Scott, tell us where people can get more information about your battles and maybe offer some help if they would like to. What website?
It's defendthefamily.com. defendthefamily.com. You can reach me by email through that. And there's also a link to my blog, which is scottlively.net.
Our guest has been Scott Lively. I got to tell you, I have enormous admiration and affection for Scott Lively. Thanks, Scott.